The strangest thing happened to me in an instant. I was in the hospital, and the next moment I was outside my body. Hello, my name is Anna Stone, and I experienced a near-death experience on November 8th, 2016, when I was 38 years old. It felt as if all of a sudden I had detached from my body, floating up toward the ceiling. Then I heard the steady beeping of the heart monitor, the kind you often hear in movies during a death scene. But unbelievably, I felt no despair, no fear, no sadness, no panic. It was just an observation, a clear thought, without drama or exaggerated emotion, like I was watching a scene from above. I could see everything clearly, my body lying on the stretcher and the doctors bustling around, trying to revive me. It all felt so far away. I had no connection to that scene, no fear, no urgency, no worry, just an observing gaze. In that moment, a realization hit me like a shock. I was still myself, my mind was functioning, my thoughts were intact, and even my personality, complete with its sarcastic humor, remained unchanged. It was fascinating to realize that even after my death, none of that had changed. But wait, how could this be possible? I had never really thought about what happens after death because scientifically it simply didn't make sense. And yet here I was, floating above the hospital ceiling, watching everything unfold in a way that let me remain myself. That's when the question forced its way into my mind. If I was here, then what really happens after our death? If someone had told me this story before, I probably would have laughed it off and said it was just made up. After all, I was a scientist, someone who had always believed in logic, reason, and what could be proven. I had spent years working on government projects involving analyses and data, and I always thought near-death experiences were just illusions created by a dying brain, hallucinations caused by lack of oxygen. I had already explored this topic before, but life has a surprising way of challenging our certainties. Before all this happened, my personal life was in complete turmoil. I was trapped in a toxic marriage, caught in a cycle of self-destruction, drinking more alcohol than I should have, all while ignoring the clear warning signs of distress from my body. What started as a slight bleeding had spiraled out of control. My body seemed to be sending an alarm, but I chose to look the other way. The day it happened, I remember joking with my family, saying I thought I might lose my life because of this bleeding, but deep down, I had no idea how serious it really was. Then, everything went black. The next image that came to mind was the hospital, where the doctors told me I had fainted from blood loss. But the problem was far more severe than I had imagined. I found out I had a ruptured ectopic pregnancy inside me, and my body was shutting down. I had already lost almost half my blood without realizing it. That's when I felt the worst kind of fear, overwhelming anxiety and pure panic. Something inside me was screaming that disaster was imminent. My whole body felt like it was about to explode, every cell vibrating as if warning me something was terribly wrong. And right then I was fighting against this unbearable sensation, and then in an instant it all vanished. There was no more pain, no panic, and when I realized I was no longer there, that I had left my body, everything happened very fast. In a second, I confronted the worst feeling of my life, as if my body was about to burst. The next moment, it all disappeared. Pain, hope, panic, all just faded away. Before I knew what was happening, I wasn't inside myself anymore. The best way to describe it is like I was a balloon that had floated into a room. I felt myself rise and drift until I reached the ceiling. That's when I knew I was no longer in my body. From above, I saw my own body lying on the stretcher with doctors rushing around trying to revive me. The heart monitors beeping showed that I was dead, and even witnessing all this, I felt nothing, no anxiety, no fear, no urge to return. I looked at the scene and found it strange, but what shocked me most was realizing that I was still me. My mind was clear, my thoughts unchanged, my sense of humor intact. I observed all the chaos and thought with my usual sarcasm that it was pretty embarrassing. Then a thought hit me like a punch. This shouldn't be happening. Up until that moment, I had been certain that death was the end, that there was no soul, no consciousness floating around, no life beyond death. And here I was, proving to myself that everything I thought I knew about reality could be completely wrong. If I was still conscious, what would happen next? Where was I going? While I floated there, I saw the doctors scrambling to bring me back. At one point, I overheard one of them make a comment that deeply disturbed me. He said my medical records showed a history of medications and implied I was just another drug addict, which really surprised me. Yes, I had struggled with drugs in the past, but that had been behind me for years. Still, at that moment, I felt no resentment. I just listened as if it was trivial information. The emotions came later when I returned to myself. At that time, everything felt neutral, almost like I was becoming an emotionless observer. Then suddenly, a worry settled in my mind. My children, I was dying. Who would take care of them? What would happen to them? As that thought crossed my mind, I was pulled away, or rather transported to another point of reality. In an instant, I was no longer in the hospital, but instantly at my eldest daughter's side, who was in Fresno 340 kilometers away, sitting in class taking a test. Everything was incredibly clear. The clock on the wall showed the exact time, and I could observe every detail around it. It looked good. And before I could fully process this, I was once again pulled into another place. This time, I saw my younger daughter, Lucy, in the hospital waiting room. She was just 2 years old, playing with Lego blocks, and seemed to be in good health. At that moment, something disturbing struck me. When I turned my gaze to the right, I could see the hospital and my family, but when I looked to the left, I was no longer at the hospital. I was somewhere completely different, a place that bore no resemblance to Earth. The moment I shifted my gaze to the left, everything changed. The hospital disappeared, and suddenly I found myself in a completely different environment. It was neither a tunnel nor heaven nor a dark void, but a strange space that still felt natural. The area was a whitish, slightly golden color with no visible walls or ceiling. I could sense the boundaries of the space, knowing I was in some kind of room. And the strangest part was that I wasn't alone. I couldn't see anyone around me, but I felt their presence. There were others there, even though they were invisible. Then one of the most extraordinary realizations hit me. I no longer had a body. I was just a consciousness. I had no hands, eyes, or mouth, yet I could see and perceive everything around me. The most impressive part was realizing that my vision was no longer the same as before. Now I could see everything at once. If I wanted to look behind me, I didn't have to turn my head. I just had to think it. My perception was complete, like having 360-degree vision. And this didn't scare me, it was simply a fact. Then something even stranger happened. Suddenly, I saw a figure appear before me, and to my great surprise, that figure was me. Yes, it was truly myself standing right in front of me, but it wasn't exactly a reflection. It was a slightly different version of me, like a twin with subtle differences. The face was almost the same, but there was something different about the features, the hair, the gaze. Before I could ask what was happening, this version of myself transmitted a message to me, but not in words. The communication was instantaneous, like a thought sent directly into my mind. The message was brief, a negation, Kitinas. No. A direct, empathetic, and clear way of saying no. That was all, but I immediately understood it meant I couldn't stay. It wasn't my time. I had to go back. And in the next moment, I was pulled back. The sensation of re-entering my body was intense. If leaving had been an immediate relief, the return was the exact opposite. It felt as if all my essence was being drawn into a dark vortex focused on a single point. I was pulled back into my body through my navel, and the sensation was unbearable, as if something was forcing me into a space far too tight. Right then, I visualized the tunnel many people describe, but for me, it didn't appear as a physical tunnel, more like a beam of energy, a kind of compressed passage. My consciousness was fixed on a single point as I was propelled toward life, and then came the worst part, the feeling of suffocation. It was like being trapped underwater, drowning, unable to breathe. For a moment, I thought I was going to die again, but suddenly, like breaking the surface, my body reacted. I gasped, opened my eyes, and took a deep breath. The fear on the faces of the doctors is something I will never forget. When I woke up, chaos reigned. The doctors hadn't expected me to come back. In fact, they had already stopped the procedures and were at that moment filling out documents, seemingly having accepted my death. What happened next was even stranger. As soon as I found my voice, I started asking questions. "You said this about me," I said, pointing to one of the doctors, repeating exactly what they'd said about my history with medications. His expression froze. He looked at his colleagues, utterly shocked. "How did you hear that?" Zrania asked, and it was then I realized I wasn't supposed to hear anything. My heart had stopped. My vital signs were flat, yet I'd heard everything. I would have loved for someone to tell me that I was just imagining things, that it was all an illusion, that my mind was simply playing tricks on me. But no, they confirmed every detail. That was when I realized I was truly dead. A radical change, but one that made more sense to me than anything else in my life. It was just the beginning of a series of transformations yet to come. I had barely become a teacher when something inside me remained unsettled. It felt as if this near-death experience had ignited a new desire within me to understand life, consciousness, and the realities beyond what we can perceive. Returning to my old life and pretending nothing had happened was not an option. So I made an unexpected decision. I went back to university. I first completed the undergraduate degree I had abandoned years before. Then I pursued a master's, and finally I dedicated myself to a doctorate focusing on psychology and consciousness, a field completely different from the conventional science I had been involved with before. By then, my perception of the world had fundamentally shifted. Before, I saw everything only through the lens of science, believing only in what could be tested, proven, and replicated. But now I understood there was something much broader, something that traditional science had yet to fully explore. Then another strange experience occurred. After my near-death experience, I noticed my intuition had sharpened. Small things happened, like knowing what someone was going to say before they spoke, or sensing when a major event was about to take place. At first, I chose to ignore these feelings. After all, I was still skeptical, and my rational mind refused to accept these phenomena. However, over time, I realized this intuition had always been part of me. I had simply ignored its voice throughout my life. Now, after everything I had been through, I could no longer deny it. That's when I began to help others. A radical upheaval, but one that held more meaning than anything I had experienced before in my life. However, this was just the beginning of a series of changes that followed. After becoming a teacher, a persistent worry lingered within me. It felt as if this near-death experience had sparked an insatiable need to learn more about life, consciousness, and what truly exists beyond our perception. I simply couldn't go back to my old life and pretend nothing had happened. So I made a surprising decision. I went back to university. At first, I completed my undergraduate studies, which I had left unfinished years earlier. Then I decided to push further by pursuing a master's degree, and eventually I found myself in a doctoral program studying psychology and consciousness, a field completely different from the traditional science I had worked in before. By that point, my worldview had changed dramatically. I used to see everything through the rigid lens of science, believing only in what could be tested, proven, and replicated. But now I realized there was something much bigger, something conventional science had not yet fully explained. Shortly after, other strange things started to happen. Following the near-death experience, I began to feel my intuition sharpening. Small things would occur, like anticipating what someone was about to say before they spoke, or sensing that something important was going to happen. At first, I chose to ignore these sensations because I was still skeptical and my rational mind refused to accept them. However, little by little, I understood that this ability had always been within me, but I had ignored it for years. Now, after everything I had been through, I could no longer deny it. That's when I began to help others. I started studying the human mind traumas and emotional blocks in depth. I became a guide for those who felt lost, helping them overcome pains that seemed impossible to heal. My past, which I once saw as a burden, now made perfect sense. It had prepared me for this moment. I realized this was my purpose. Death had not been the end for me. In fact, it was the beginning of everything. If I hadn't died that day, I would probably still be trapped in the same destructive cycle, feeling lost and without direction. But now I knew exactly why I was here. My purpose was to help, to make a difference. If there's one lesson this experience taught me, it's that life goes far beyond what we can imagine. We spend so much time worrying about problems, fears, and insecurities that we forget what truly matters. When I died, I realized none of it carried the weight I thought it did. What truly matters in the end isn't the mistakes, failures, or pain, but what we've learned and how we choose to live. The greatest transformation in my life happened when I understood that every obstacle has a purpose. Sometimes the challenges we face are just opportunities to rediscover ourselves, to break free from a path that no longer serves us and embark on a journey that truly matters. I had to die to realize all of this, but it's not necessary for you. Your life has meaning, even if it's hard to see right now. You are not here by accident. Every experience, every moment, every challenge is a piece of a much larger puzzle. Everything can change the moment you decide to see life through different eyes. If this story has touched you in any way, if it made you reflect on your own journey, I invite you to subscribe to the channel. Here we share real stories that can change your perspective on life and what lies beyond. So if you believe everything happens for a reason, if you feel there's something greater waiting for you, don't miss the upcoming stories. Subscribe now, turn on notifications, and join us to discover a new way of seeing life. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you in the next video.